Every wound has a lesson. Every lesson has a purpose. Every purpose has a leader. God saved my soul, but leadership saved my life. I was 7 years old the first time the world tried to break me. And at that age, you don't have the words for pain. You only have the feeling of it, heavy, confusing, suffocating. Something inside me changed that day. Something was taken, and something else was born. From that moment at 7, there wasn't enough love in the world to make me feel protected again. So I did what many do. I built walls, thick ones. I harbored distrust. I nurtured anger. I gave both of them a home inside me because they felt safe. By 16, those same emotions pushed me out of 2 different homes. I remember one night when the cold gripped me so violently that my body locked up. The wind cut through my clothes. It was trying to reach bone, and I collapsed into a ditch just to get a moment of relief from the cold beating against my thin clothes and skin. The ditch became my shield against the sharp needles. My breath was the only warmth I could count on. I felt low, but the ditch wasn't the bottom. It was the beginning. Because life wasn't done testing me, not even close. Years later, I traded that cold ditch for the blistering heat of Afghanistan, where the air tasted like dust and metal, where every breath felt borrowed, where every step carried a question, is this the one? I watched friends get blown apart by an enemy we couldn't see, yet we still had to keep moving, step after step, heartbeat after heartbeat, the dry earth crunching below my feet, uncertain what the next step would bring. Combat changes you. It reveals you. It strips away anything that isn't real. It shows you who you are when everything around you is falling apart. And somehow, through the trauma, through the cold, the heat, the death, the silence, something in me refused to die. Instead, I learned to fight. I learned to keep getting up no matter what life or my choices brought to me. I was becoming a warrior. People see the leader I am today and think it came from discipline or training. Everything I have become as a leader is because I went back to see my pain, to face it, to heal it, to grow from it, to reclaim the parts of me that were buried under years of survival. Leadership came from my willingness to confront my brokenness, to stop running from it. I am the leader I am because I refuse to let the darkest moments of my past define the future God had for me. Because I learned that the only way to lead people is to first learn how to lead yourself out of the places that tried to destroy you. Everything in this book was born from that journey. And now I'm handing it to you. You have the ability to break through, to rise. Every leader must learn to see your story, see your truth, see the moments that shaped you, see the pieces that tried to break you, see the strength you refused to let go. Only then can you understand. Only then can you manifest. Only then can you become the sum. To become the sum of every battle you refuse to lose. I am proof of that. Let my story become your roadmap to an undeniable future. Let this be the moment you stop running from who you were and step into who you were always meant to be. Greatness isn't found. Greatness is forged. And this right here, right now, is where your becoming begins. Before you lead the world, you must confront the world within. There are moments in life when you realize the version of yourself that the world sees is not the same one you live with. You can be admired, accomplished, disciplined, or even feared and still feel a fracture inside that no one else recognizes. Leadership books rarely start at that place. They begin with strategies and principles as if leadership begins polished, but real leadership does not begin polished. It begins in the shadows of the parts of your story that you have avoided, the parts that shaped you long before anyone knew your name. For years, I lived as 2 versions of myself, the one people saw and the one I kept hidden. Outwardly, I was capable, focused, and driven. Inside, I was tired, conflicted, and quietly unraveling. I learned how to perform strength well enough that no one questioned whether I was struggling. I learned how to push hard enough that no one noticed where I was hurting. And I learned how to achieve enough that no one suspected the weight I carried when the uniform came off. That duality is far more common than anyone realizes. We live in a world that praises resilience, but rarely acknowledges what it costs. We celebrate perseverance without examining the wounds underneath. We applaud strength but remain silent about the breaking it required. And because of that silence, many people mistake survival for leadership. They confuse endurance with purpose. They confuse numbness with discipline. I wrote this book because I reached a point where survival was no longer enough. I had succeeded in ways I once dreamed about. I had earned titles, completed missions, and stepped into roles that demanded precision and grit. Yet, even as I excelled outwardly, my inner world grew darker and quieter. I felt disconnected from myself, a stranger wearing my own life. At some point, you stop asking whether you can keep going. You start asking yourself why you're going at all. That question changed everything. The journey to answer it became the foundation of this book. Leadership for me was not born from triumph. It was born from truth, not from titles, from honesty, not from strength alone, from healing. Healing began when I was finally willing to see my story clearly and stop pretending I was unaffected by it. I didn't know it then, but I was stepping into the first pillar of what I now call the SUM model, see. And to understand where that story began, you have to go back further than the uniform or the missions or the moments people think define leadership. You have to go back to a 16-year-old boy standing at a Greyhound station with a one-way ticket to Michigan. My friends thought I was leaving to chase sports. They believed I was hungry for opportunity. The truth was far less heroic. I was broken. I carried a face that looked emotionless on the outside, but was flooded with confusion on the inside. I was angry in ways I couldn't explain because anger was the only emotion I knew how to access. What I didn't realize then was that the anger was not anger at all. It was hurt. Hurt that I didn't know how to name. Hurt that started the day I was molested at 7 years old by people trusted to protect me. Hurt from the confusion of loving parents while navigating the absence of a biological father who didn't know how to love me back. Hurt layered on top of a birth that began with a fight. My mother battling cancer while carrying me. My body entering the world blue, breathless, wrapped in the cord that gave me life, also nearly took my life. The battles began early and they kept coming. Ypsilanti, Michigan was supposed to be a fresh start, but it became a harsher classroom than I could have imagined. I slept on a couch and lived out of my suitcase. I washed the same few clothes repeatedly because the family dog used them as a daily bathroom. I walked home from practices in weather that felt cruel, and on the day my pain finally erupted into anger, I was put out into the cold. That night I wandered the streets, nowhere to go. I knocked on doors of friends who would not let me in. I curled up in a ditch to shield myself from the wind. Another night, a neighbor let me sleep in a den crowded with dogs, and I woke up covered in flea bites. I was angry. I was cold. I was exhausted. I was confused. I was hurt. And I did not know how to process any of it. But something happened to me in those moments, something that would shape the rest of my life. After spending so much time low, so much time angry, so much time feeling invisible, something inside me began to shift. My anger softened into awareness. My bitterness broke open into reflection. My survival instincts cracked enough for empathy to emerge. I realized the world did not owe me healing. I had to participate as if I owed myself, and I needed to become the person I wish had shown up for me. I needed to stop giving my pain permission to lead me. I needed to stop excusing behavior and start examining it. I needed strength, yes, but I also needed forgiveness, courage, humility, and God. In that transformation, I found the first truth of leadership. Before you can lead anyone else, you must learn to lead yourself. And leading yourself starts with confronting the parts of you that you have allowed to remain unled, the unspoken wounds, the hidden insecurities, the stories you keep buried because naming them feel like weakness. Leadership does not start with ambition. It starts with honesty. It starts with seeing your story as it really is. This is the beginning of SUM, the moment when C becomes the doorway to everything else. Many people never reach their potential, not because they lack talent, but because their foundation was never strengthened. They try to climb while their inner world collapses. They try to influence others while avoiding the truth of who they are becoming. And eventually the gap between their public image and private identity becomes too wide to sustain. The gap nearly cost me everything. It wasn't because I was incapable, it was because I was incomplete. When I say leadership saved my life, I do not mean the kind found in manuals. I mean the kind that forces you to rebuild your relationship with your own soul. The kind that makes you confront the silence you avoided. The kind that teaches you that strength is not absence of pain, but the transformation of it. And this is where the idea of Black leadership becoming the sum enters the heart of this book. Black in its truest form is not an absence. It is an absorption. Black gathers every wavelength of light into itself. It holds complexity. It holds depth. It holds history and presence. Black does not reflect, it collects. It carries. Leadership at its highest level works the same way. You are not shaped by one story. You are shaped by the sum of them, your failures and your victories, your fractures and your resilience, your trauma and your transformation, your identity, your faith, your perspective, your grit, your gifts. Leadership is the absorption of all your moments into wisdom. And this is the bridge into the sum model. The journey that took me years to understand now comes down to 3 movements. See, understand, manifest. You must see. See your truth with honesty. See your truth without running. See the patterns and wounds you have carried. See the strength you forgot was yours. You must understand. Understand what shapes you. Understand where healing is needed. Understand the identity beneath your survival. Understand the purpose beneath your pain. You must manifest. Manifest a new identity, manifest discipline, leadership, manifest purpose through action, manifest the life God has been calling you toward. This is the leadership that embraces depth instead of perfection, identity instead of performance, truth instead of image. Leadership that understands you can't rise fully until you stop hiding the patterns of you that feel least worthy of the climb. You are not reading a story of perfection. You are entering a journey of transformation. And transformation begins when you decide that you will no longer settle for the version of yourself built for survival. You are stepping into the version that leadership requires, the version that absorbs every part of your story and transforms it into strength. This is where your becoming begins. Pressure is the classroom, experience is the teacher, becoming is the assignment. You do not become a leader the day someone hands you a title. You do not become a leader the day you receive a promotion, a rank, or a new set of responsibilities. Leadership begins long before any of that. It begins in the moments you would rather forget, in the places where pain shapes you faster than progress, and in the seasons where life demands something from you that you are not convinced you possess. For most of my life, I did not understand this. I thought leadership was about strength that people could see from a distance. I thought it was about composure that never cracked, confidence that never wavered, and decisiveness that never hesitated. I thought leadership was something you learned to display, not something you learned to confront within yourself. I thought leadership was earned through achievement, not survival. Then life in its unrelenting way taught me the truth. Leadership revealed itself to me on a night when I was sitting alone on the edge of my bunk, deployed overseas, holding a 9mm Beretta in my hand. The room was dark. The air felt thick and unmoving, as if the entire world had frozen around me. My uniform clung to my skin with the weight of exhaustion that had nothing to do with the mission. My thoughts had become heavier than my body, and for the first time in my life, it felt as if my mind no longer belonged to me. I remember the coldness of the steel in my hand. It shocked me at first like a truth I had been avoiding. I remember how the bullet felt in my right hand. I remember thinking that the world might be better without me in it. I remember wondering when exactly it had begun to disappear from myself, when the version of me I once recognized had slipped into silence. There was no noise outside, no chaos, no combat, just the sound of my own breathing and a heart that felt it had stopped believing in me. No one came knocking. No one came looking. No one came to rescue or to save me from myself. Pain becomes dangerous when it grows quiet. Loud pain forces you to fight. Quiet pain convinces you that you already are defeated. Quiet pain whispers that there is no point. That night, the silence inside me felt final. I raised the empty weapon to my head. My hand trembled from the confusion of not understanding myself anymore. I had survived explosions. I had survived long missions, long nights, combat stress, and emotional turmoil. But I had not survived my own mind, and I did not know how. Before I finished squeezing the trigger, something rose inside me. It was not strength. It was not clarity. It was a sudden fear of the truth. I realized I didn't want to die. I wanted the pain to stop. I wanted the numbness to break. I wanted to feel something again, something real, something hopeful. But in that moment, all I could feel was the cold steel and the weight of surrender. The click echoed through the room like a command. It was louder than any explosion I had survived, louder than any briefing I had attended, louder than any fear I had tried to bury. That sound did not free me. It confronted me. It forced a truth I had spent years avoiding. No one was coming to rescue me. If I wanted to live, I had to lead myself out of the darkness I had become comfortable in. Self-leadership does not begin with motivation. It does not begin with confidence. It begins with honesty. It begins with the willingness to look at your own pain and decide that you are worth the work required to rise again. I had never been taught that. I had only been taught how to survive externally. I had never been taught how to survive internally. That night did not turn me into a leader. It exposed a part of me that had never been led. It showed me that the greatest battlefield I will ever face was the one no one else could see. I spent years leading teams in high-risk environments. I had given direction. I had made decisions. I had executed missions that required precision and clarity. Yet in my quietest moment, the one person I had never learned to lead was myself. That realization broke me in ways no deployment ever could. It forced me to confront the version of myself I had avoided. It forced me to accept that leadership begins with the person you see in the mirror before it reaches anyone else. Healing became my first act of leadership. Honesty became my first challenge. Vulnerability became my first weapon. Growth became my first assignment. Transformation did not happen quickly. It didn't happen cleanly. It did not come with a single prayer, a single conversation, or a single moment of clarity. It came through small decisions. It came through admitting things I did not want to say out loud. It came through learning to ask for help. It came through conversations that hurt but healed. It came through learning to forgive myself for things I never should have been holding against myself. Somewhere in the process, I learned that every leader people admire has walked through something that nearly broke them. Some survived families that abandoned them. Some survived the weight of responsibility they were not prepared for. Some survived their own doubt, their own failure, their own silence. Some, like me, survived their own minds. Leadership begins in the fire. Transformation begins in the breaking. Purpose begins in the moment you decide you are worth rebuilding. The world sees the medals, the titles, the promotions. It rarely sees the nights you begged God for one more reason to stay. Yet those nights are often where leadership is truly born. When I say that God saved my soul, but leadership saved my life, it is because leadership forced me to confront what I had avoided. Leadership demanded accountability. It demanded responsibility. It demanded emotional courage. It demanded a willingness to walk toward the parts of myself I did not understand. It demanded that I become the person others needed me to be, but also the person I needed to become for myself. Leadership did not begin the moment others followed me. Leadership began the moment I decided to stop abandoning myself. And I did not decide that until after a long 15-month deployment. Coming home after a long deployment felt like stepping into a world I had no longer recognized. The colors looked too bright, as if someone had adjusted the contrast on reality. The sounds felt louder, sharper, and intrusive. Even the air felt foreign. I had turned 21 in Iraq, surrounded by violence, indirect fire, long nights, missions that blurred together, and a sense of purpose that existed only because survival depended on it. There was a unique kind of clarity that comes from living in an environment where every moment matters. Returning to a place where the world moved without me felt disorienting. When the buses pulled up to the parade field, the atmosphere exploded with celebration. Families rushed forward with tears and laughter. Children ran into waiting arms. Flags waved. The band played. Signs with names and welcome home messages bounced above the crowd. It was a reunion filled with emotion, but it was a reunion I did not know how to participate in. I watched soldiers fall into the arms of people who belonged to them. I watched relief wash over their faces of parents and spouses, and I stood in formation feeling like a visitor in my own life. Halfway through a deployment, I had received a Dear John letter. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself I had expected it. I told myself I did not need anyone. But standing there surrounded by reunions I was not part of, the truth hit harder than any blast I ever felt overseas. I felt abandoned. I felt forgotten. I felt like I had returned to a world that had no place ready for me. Because I was still married and had not yet had the opportunity to file for divorce, I was not allowed back in the barracks. Regulations didn't consider emotional reality. They only recognized paperwork. The duplex I had rented before deploying, an eviction notice was taped to the door. My belongings were gone. The lock had been changed. At least I had the courtesy of knowing this before I left the parade field. I stood there in uniform with a duffel bag at my feet, staring at a piece of paper that confirmed that I had already felt I was home, but I had nowhere to go. People talk about the loneliness of deployment, but they rarely talk about the loneliness of returning. They do not talk about the feeling of walking from combat to a place where everyone expects you to be fine. They do not talk about the emptiness that follows you when the adrenaline disappears. They did not talk about the silence that comes after months of constant noise. As I stood there, a friend approached me. He was not overly emotional. He did not try to hug me or give me inspirational speech. He simply walked over, looked me in my eyes, and asked, "You good?" I nodded, even though everything inside me said no. He asked if I had somewhere to go. I told him I did not. He did not ask another question. He did not pressure me. He did not explain. He did not make me explain. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a set of keys, and said, "I have a unit open in one of my fourplexes. Use it until you get back on your feet." No conditions, no expectations, no judgment. It was quiet leadership, the kind that comes from someone who understands that words are not always the answer. Sometimes presence is enough. That one act did not erase my pain, but it reminded me of something I had started to forget. I was not disposable. My life still had weight. My story had value. And even when I felt unseen, God could still send people who saw what I could not see in myself. I moved into a small apartment that night. It was empty, except for the basics, a mattress, a chair, a table, but it felt like a lifeline. It gave me a place to breathe again. At night, I would sit in the chair by the window and stare at the parking lot lights. I felt suspended between two lives. I had survived 15 months in Iraq, but I had not returned whole. There were moments when I would sit on the floor with my back against the wall, feeling the weight of everything I had experienced pressing against me. I questioned who I was supposed to be now. I questioned whether I still had purpose. I questioned whether the world had moved on without me. I questioned whether coming home was supposed to feel this confusing. But in that confusion, something became clear. I could not stay who I was. I did not know what the next version of me should look like. I knew the current version could not carry me forward. I needed direction. I needed challenge. I needed something that forced me to evolve. The apartment became the place where I started to rebuild myself. Not quickly, not neatly, but honestly. It was the first place I realized that transformation begins long before the world notices. It begins in the silence when you decide you cannot remain the same. The nights were long, but the clarity they brought was real. I needed something bigger than routine. I needed a mission that demanded more from me, not so I could prove anything to anyone else, but so I could remember who I was capable of becoming. That desire led me down a path that would reshape my identity in ways I did not expect. I would push beyond my limits, correct my view of myself, and forge the leader I would one day become. It started with a simple thought. I cannot stay here. I have to become something more.